Welcome back into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. Check out fullpresscoverage.com for this podcast, other great podcasts, other great articles, some by John Sapichetti. And you can find our podcast wherever podcasts are found. Just type in the name, the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap. I know it's a little wordy, but if you type the whole thing in, you'll be rewarded with our lovely voices, and you can find our lovely faces on YouTube, youtube.com/Jet Stryer. So, Sap, the NBA in the bubble last year took a new approach and went to a play-in tournament for the last couple of seeds, the 7 and 8 seed, something that a lot of fans have been calling for years because typically the 7 and 8 seed are, basically lambs to the slaughter. And so why not make it at least interesting to see who gets into those spots? And it also discourages more tanking. It was a success last year, despite the fact that it was arranged for the Pelicans and Zion Williamson to get in. They didn't live up to their end of the bargain, but it was still entertaining. And the Blazers actually made a nice run of it to get that 8th spot and get into the playoff tournament, even though they ended up losing in 5 games to the Lakers. So still lambs to the slaughter. But it looks like the NBA is going to keep this for the foreseeable future. We know they're doing it this year, and it looks like for beyond. So the play-in tournament is here to stay. Is this a good idea, Sap, or do they need to make adjustments, or should they just go back to the old ways?
At first, I was hesitant to embrace this, but the more I think about it, the more I see, I like it. I've never been a big fan of a one-game play-in. I think the wild card in baseball is certainly interesting, but then it's only one game after you have a 162-game regular season. I would prefer a 2 out of 3. But in this situation, when you're talking about 7, 8, 9, and 10, one game is good enough. So 7 plays 8. The winner of that game becomes the 7 seed. 9 plays 10. The winner of that plays the loser of 7, 8, and that becomes the 8 seed. I like it. I think it's worked out well. It's kept a couple of extra teams involved. You get a team like Golden State that maybe would have trouble qualifying for the playoffs. They can be the 10 seed, and we know Steph Curry can get uber hot and win a couple of playoff games or play-in games, and next thing you know, he's in the playoffs. So I think it's going to be interesting because the matchups should be really interesting. Like 7, 8 right now in the West would be Portland, Memphis, Ja Morant against Dame Lillard. That's a pretty sexy matchup, right? Yeah, so I kind of like it now. I'm embracing it, and I think the league should go forward with this because it just, again, adds 2 teams to the Western Conference, 2 teams to the Eastern Conference that at least they're playing for something. In the Eastern Conference, we see how well Washington's playing, and who the hell wants to face them in a play-in because Bradley Beal's good for a 40-point game, although he's never won a game when he scored 40 points, which is kind of crazy. But then you got Russell Westbrook, who's averaging a triple-double once again. So I like it. It's grown on me. I don't think you want your favorite team to get in that situation because anything can happen. The Celtics likely are going to play into that unless they get their act together. I think the Lakers are going to avoid it. But I've embraced it. I like it now, and I think it's something the league should stick with.
Yeah, I think it's more fun than, that the sort of slog to the bottom of the playoff race where you're seeing, teams just kind of almost trying to avoid it because they know they're just going to get smoked by whoever the 1 seed is. And that is going to happen again. But at least you have some semblance of like feeling good. Like, hey, we got into this. We earned this spot by playing in this playoff tournament. So I think it's a nice little carrot for fan bases and for some teams. And in a typical year where, fans are in attendance and the gate revenue does make a difference, getting at least 2 extra games of gate revenue and ticket sales, especially for the playoffs. That helps teams a lot with, payroll. It can make a big difference. So from a team perspective, you want to get into it because you get a little bit extra money in your pocket. The only issue I have with it, Sap, is I do feel like a lot of times the 8 seed I'm totally on board with. The 7 seed, a lot of times I feel like is pretty firmly entrenched in that 7 seed where it seems like, man, they didn't have that bad of a year and they're, 5 or 6 games ahead of the 8th seed, and it kind of seems unfair that they have to put their playoff standing in jeopardy to teams that haven't really, played well. So I look at it as maybe should they talk about just doing it for the 8th seed? But again, the likelihood of a 7 beating a 2 is very, very unlikely as well. That rarely ever happens. So the more you can, I guess, spice it up and make for more games that are interesting to watch that have something on the line, I think that's probably better for the future of basketball. And those games will at least get ratings and get eyeballs because there's something at stake, regardless of whether, it's at stake and then, they get to the playoff spot and lose in 4 games, which is the most likely scenario. You're still, I think it generates interest when, okay, if they win this, they get something. If they lose this, they're out. So that inherently generates interest, even though, like I said, the future, quickly thereafter, they'll be bounced from the playoffs.
Yeah, you could go to the top 7 qualifying, and then maybe you have a 3-team round robin with 8, 9, and 10, or you just have 8 and 9 have a 1-game play-in for the 8 seed, or the 8 just has to beat the 9 once, the 9 has to beat the 8 twice. I'm giving us all a popsicle headache at this point. But if you're looking at it from a Celtics standpoint, right, let's say the Celtics end up being in the play-in tournament, and they're the 8 team, so they have to beat the 7 team to qualify as the 7. If they lose that game, then they have to beat the winner of 9-10 to be 8. Would you rather see them not qualify for the playoffs and go to the draft lottery? Because the scenario of them winning in the play-in tournament is to get absolutely destroyed by either Brooklyn or Philadelphia. And maybe you have some chance against Philadelphia because you've beaten them twice in the postseason. Oh, they have no matchup for Joel Embiid this year. They did in the past. Would you rather see them not even qualify and then maybe get into the lottery and, I don't know, have the 14th pick once again and pick Romeo Langford or Aaron Nesmith? I don't know. It's a tough situation. But it does make it more appealing. I do get your point though, because that's the pushback I have with baseball, Jet, is when you see the wild card teams and one team won 93 games and the other one won 86.
Right.
There's a 7-game difference. You played 162 games. I'm 7 games better than you, and now we have a 1-game play-in. Play-ins have always been in baseball when there's actually a tie. Go back to 1978, the Red Sox and Yankees tied for the American League East, and they had 1 game to decide who won the American League East. The loser went home despite winning 99 games. Again, that's back when only 2 teams from each league qualified for the postseason. So, there's some tweaking to do, but to get more teams involved, I think is a good sign. Because, again, I'd like to see more of Steph Curry in Golden State. I'd like to see more of Westbrook and Bradley Beal in Washington. Those teams may have been left out if it was just a traditional 1 through 8.
Yeah, look at the 7th seed right now in the Western Conference is Portland. They're 33-28, which it's not an amazing record, but it's a pretty good record. And for that to
be a winning record,
to be in jeopardy of not making the playoffs at all because of this tournament, I could see the gripe with that, right? Saying, well, what else do we really have to do? We know we're not going to win the championship, but so I think there's good and bad. It all reminds me of. And, some people like him, some people hate him. Bill Simmons had this idea. I'm looking at an article of his back in 2007. Sierra graduated high school. For a similar idea, except for I actually liked his a little bit better. He called it the Entertaining as Hell tournament. This was the idea, Sap, was it would be a double elimination tournament for the 7th and 8th seeds between the remaining teams. So all the teams that have not qualified above them. So basically every team that hasn't qualified above 7 or above 6 is in this tournament. So he said all those teams play. And he said we call it the Entertaining as Hell tournament. And then the top 12 teams get the reward of you get a 2-week rest while the tournament plays out. So basically he's saying do it sort of like a March Madness, except for double elimination. The higher ranked teams get a little bit of rest. The lower ranked teams have to battle it out for the 7 and 8 seeds.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea. So at that situation, you'd have 9 teams in the West have a double elimination tournament. 9 teams in the East have a double elimination tournament. The top 6 in each conference get 2 weeks off. Kind of like in football, when you're the number 1 seed in either conference, you get a bye week. Although football is different than basketball, that bye week is so valuable in football because the other teams have to battle a week after the season ends, and you can kind of sit home and heal your wounds. A 2-week break in basketball, that's supposed to be a benefit, but it may not be. Like, you're going to shut down the NBA season for 12 teams for 2 weeks while the rest of them keep playing. And maybe you lose a little bit of rhythm. Look, if you're an older team or if you're Brooklyn and the Lakers, you'd probably, embrace a 2-week break to get those guys healthy and get more rest.
Right. So when he wrote this up in 2007, tanking was more of a problem than it is now. I mean, it's still an issue, but I think it was a little bit more rampant. So I think a lot of it was to really discourage tanking. So he says that, a benefit would this be that no team could tank down the stretch without insulting paying customers beyond repair. That's the lamest thing about tanking. Not that it's morally unsound, but that fans pay full price to see a depleted group of losers with dubious intentions. And so we've talked about this with the rest. The load management has become a bigger issue in the NBA now than tanking. Same principle. You're paying to see not the full product, or not the product that's as great as it can be. So I think, a lot of this was designed with that. It seems like we're talking about ancient history in 2007. It wasn't that long ago, but the league's landscape has changed a little bit, where I think they've fixed tanking a bit in the regards that, one, the draft is deeper, so you're not as desperate to get one of those top picks. It just happened with more time, more good players have come out. And two, they've flattened the lottery odds a little bit. They've made them less advantageous for the top teams. So, you have less of a chance if you're the worst team to get the top pick as it was in 2007. I thought that was a smart move. They did that about 2 years ago, and they've made it a little bit more competitive in the lottery. So I don't see tanking as a huge problem in the NBA like it was maybe 10, 12 years ago. The load management's the bigger issue. We've talked about that ad nauseum. Zap on the podcast, but I do think this is a good way to reward fan bases whose teams, might not otherwise be entertaining, to have a couple of entertaining or meaningful games, even if the reward is to get smoked by whoever the top seed is, Brooklyn, Utah in the first round. At least there is a reward for the season, as opposed to just slogging through mediocrity or miserable year.
Yeah, I think it's a step in the right direction. Again, gets more teams involved. In the end, it's probably not going to matter who's 7, 8 going forward, because they're going to lose in the first round of the playoffs. I mean, the NBA, you don't see many upsets in the postseason. Miami kind of did last year. They were the 5 seed, and they made it to the NBA Finals. Although I think beating Milwaukee in the second round wasn't really an upset, because they actually dominated them during the regular season, and beating the Celtics in the Eastern Conference
and the
Finals
bubble aspect
wasn't a real big thing. Yeah, exactly. And then you had Denver coming back from 3 games to 1 down to beat the Clippers, despite trailing by double digits in each of the games that they came back in games 5, 6, and 7. So, yeah, I mean, I remember when Denver upset Seattle. I think it was in 1993. Seattle had won 60-plus games. And all I remember is Denver won Game 5 in Seattle to clinch it, and it was a best of 5 at that point. And all I remember is Mutombo holding on to the ball, screaming. That was like shocking, because Seattle was a title contender at that point. But you don't see it very often. You see it in hockey all the time, and in baseball you can also see it.
And the best of 5 really was to the better seeds' disadvantage. They needed to get rid of that it was too easy to get an upset in a 5-game series.
I remember in the early 80s, it was best of 3. I always tell the story that the Lakers were the defending champs. They had kind of an uneven year in 80-81. Magic had hurt his knee, missed about half the season, came back. It just didn't work, and they played Houston in a best of 3 series, and the road team won every game. Houston won the deciding game at the Forum, and Houston went all the way to the NBA Finals that year. They were 40-42. Celtics beat them in the NBA Finals, and Cedric Maxwell was the MVP of the finals. So you saw that then, but you just don't see it very often. I like what they're trying to do, maybe tweak it going forward. And see what it happens. But anytime we can see great players like Steph Curry, Russell Westbrook, Bradley Beal, I'm all for it.
Yeah, I think just my last note on this, I think it depends, on the different season and what the line of delineation is between the team, the last team that's going to be in it. Like this year, it does make sense because it's pretty bunched up, and you can make an argument that, look, Dallas is at 6 right now, which is avoiding it. They're at 34 and 27. And then those teams below that line, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Portland, as I said, 33 and 28. Memphis, 31 and 29. San Antonio, 31 and 29. Golden State's 31 and 31. So, that's pretty bunched together. The Eastern Conference is pretty similar, with the exception of the Wizards, who have been hot right now, but they're 27 and 34. You don't really look at that record as a playoff team record. So I could see a team having a gripe with that. But, look below Golden State in the West. So who would be 11 is New Orleans right now. They're 27 and 34. And say Golden State, Steph Curry has probably won, at least I'd say 5 to 10 games for them just by himself. So say they don't have Steph Curry and then they're out of it. So and New Orleans is that 10 spot with a 27-34 record. That doesn't really seem fair that a Portland Trailblazers team would be at risk of losing their seed to a team with that record. So I think it's going to, some years people will go, yeah, this is awesome. All these teams are pretty bunched together. This is, I really want to see which team can earn it in sort of a mini tournament style, versus other years where they'd be like, this team really has no business even having a chance. Why are we rewarding them for having a crappy season? So it's going to depend on how the seasons play out themselves. This year, it's pretty, especially in the Western Conference, you could make a case that any of those teams would make for an entertaining 8 seed, maybe with the exception of San Antonio, who, is just well coached and doesn't have a particularly exciting roster.
Yeah, I mean, Dame Lillard against Ja Morant, the winner becomes the 7 seed, and the loser has to maybe play Steph Curry to be the 8 seed. Sign me up for that.
Yeah. And there's so many stars in the NBA. We've talked about this too, Sep, that, the more times you have to showcase them, that's the better for the league. That's been the league's model since the 1980s, is showcase your stars. And this is just another example of how they can do that. And so, yeah, I'm for it. Until, the Celtics get screwed one year, then I'm all for it. Sap, an interesting question you posed on Twitter was looking at the careers of Chris Paul versus Russell Westbrook. 2 of my favorite players in the NBA. A year and a half ago, I wouldn't have said that, but I've grown to be in love with Chris Paul. I've always loved Russell Westbrook's game. So you were saying who's had the better career, or who would you rather have? What's your question?
Either one is fine. I mean, just say who's had the better career.
Yeah, because I think they're two different questions.
They're both going to be, better career. Who I think is the better player. I think actually the player I'm picking has had the better career and is the better player, based on the fact that I think he elevates players around him more so than the other player. You're a huge Westbrook fan. I admire the guy that he goes out there and busts his ass every night, especially when you see the Celtics sometimes playing to about 60 to 70% capacity, where it looks like they're just not really engaged, and Jason Tatum looks like his head is somewhere else. I do appreciate Russell Westbrook giving 100% every night, although sometimes it's not really heading in the right direction. He's a whirling dervish out there. He's a fantastic player, but sometimes kind of maddening. I think it's a great contrast because I think Chris Paul is the ultimate floor general, right? I mean, when you think of a point guard, it's the guy with the ball in his hands, setting up the offense, setting up the defense. He's an elite defender. I know growing up, his favorite player was Isaiah Thomas, and it makes sense because they're very, very similar the way they play. I think Isaiah was a little bit more explosive than Chris Paul. I mean, Isaiah Thomas could literally take games over. See Game 6 of the NBA Finals in '88 when I believe he scored 22 or 25 points in the third quarter with a sprained ankle. He was just unstoppable. Westbrook plays the position completely different. I think he's probably the best athlete to ever play the position. I think we can make that case, right? I mean, he's a better athlete than Magic Johnson. He's a better athlete than Steph Curry. Any other point guards you want. He's an elite athlete. So they play it completely differently. The reason I would take Chris Paul, and look, these two guys have had phenomenal careers. They're going to be first ballot Hall of Famers. If you just write down not that anybody writes down anymore, but if you type all their accomplishments, you're going to end up with carpal tunnel at some point because it's just endless what these guys have accomplished. I take Chris Paul better on the defensive end. I think he's more of a true point guard, doesn't need to score to be dominant. Also, I don't think he's played with as many great teammates as Russell Westbrook. Russell Westbrook had the opportunity to play with Kevin Durant for 8 years in OKC, and they made it to one finals. And eventually Durant moved on to Golden State because I don't think he felt that he could get to the promised land with Russell Westbrook as his point guard. I will say this. What would have been of their careers if Chris Paul had ended up in OKC? Could you picture Chris Paul and Kevin Durant together for 8 years? That would have been a tough team to stop, although I wonder how they'd work together because Chris Paul's more of the alpha. And Durant is just a phenomenal basketball player, but doesn't really care much about being a leader. I think that would have been an unstoppable duo because, Paul's more about passing than scoring, and Durant we know is an elite scorer. So I would take Chris Paul. I think it's a good question. Look, I'm going to just give you what these guys have done over their career. All NBA. Chris Paul has been named to the All NBA team 9 times. 4 times first team, 4 times second team, 1 time third team. Westbrook also 9 times. 2 times first team, 5 times second team, 2 times third team. Now, Chris Paul's been all defensive NBA, first team 7 times, second team twice. Westbrook's never been on an all defensive team. Westbrook's won an MVP. Chris Paul's been rookie of the year. Chris Paul is an 11-time All-Star. Russell Westbrook's a 9-time All-Star. Chris Paul's led the league in assists 4 times and steals 6 times. He's finished in the top 7 in MVP voting 7 times. He's 5th all-time in assists. Russell Westbrook's been top 5 MVP voting 5 times. I mean, these are all-time great players. You can't go wrong with either. Just my appreciation for basketball is more Chris Paul than Russell Westbrook. He's more in control. I think he's a better leader. And we've seen late in his career, he goes to OKC and they look like they're tanking and he gets them to the postseason. Westbrook, meanwhile, goes to Houston. It doesn't work out with James Harden. And by the way, it didn't work out with Chris Paul and James Harden either, even though they made it to the conference finals. I would take Chris Paul. I think the intangibles are better. He's a smarter player, more in control, and more of a classic point guard. But you can't go wrong with Russell Westbrook either.
Yeah, where I was going. I'd take Westbrook. Obviously, he's got the better individual accomplishment in winning an MVP versus Chris Paul, who hasn't won an MVP. He's been to the finals. Chris Paul hasn't been to the finals. And it's not like Chris Paul played on some bum-ass teams either. I think a lot of people thought that Clippers team was destined to make a finals, and they never did. In fact, they were incredibly disappointing every time they made the playoffs. The most impressive thing to me about Chris Paul, actually, has been this second part of his career where he's sort of elevating teams. Last year, what he did with the Thunder, this year, what he's done with the Suns, I think is more impressive than what he did in the prime of his career, honestly. Because I think he's come into himself more and been less of a dick as he's, with younger players.
Oh, he definitely can be a dick out there. He doesn't suffer fools. I think his basketball IQ is right there with LeBron James. And sometimes guys who are geniuses in their profession don't understand mere mortals. I think
he's found a way to curb it a little bit more.
Exactly. He does come across as a know-it-all. Look, he's the president of the Players Association, incredibly bright. He's had trouble with coaches. I think he and Doc Rivers didn't always get along. But you're right. I think as he's gotten older, he's accepted that leadership role even more. He's going to get MVP votes this year, Jet. He's averaging 16 and 8. Those aren't great numbers, but I think people appreciate his leadership.
Yeah, and listen, I'm really impressed with the second act, and the leadership thing is incredible. I think he's an unbelievable president of the Players Association. He saved the season last year, almost individually saved the season last year. He's done a great job getting players to register to vote. He's doing a good job getting players vaccinated. I mean, you can't say enough of him. He should be inducted twice into the Hall of Fame, once as a player, another as the president of the Players Association. I honestly
as a contributor.
That.
Yeah, that's not a bad opinion, Jet. Look, Tommy Heinsohn's in there as a player, coach, and broadcaster, deservedly so. A lot of the players that were on the Dream Team are in both as individual players and members of the Dream Team. That's a great take, Jet. That could be yet another column that I'm going to steal from you.
Man, I am.
When he gets inducted. You
full of
are the man
ideas.
with ideas. Yep.
But all those plaudits aside for Chris Paul, there's something about Russell Westbrook that it's just, I mean, he is just, like you said, he's a whirling dervish. He's so fun to watch. I love those guys who put in max effort. And would you say he's the best rebounding point guard of all time?
Yeah, I mean, I think the numbers are a little skewed because there's more rebounds available now than at any point. I mean, Magic Johnson was a guy who would regularly average 8 rebounds a game in a different era. Look, Oscar Robertson averaged a triple-double for 3 consecutive years, and Oscar is considered a point guard. Westbrook now is averaging a triple-double for the 4th time in the last 5 years. I mean, it's incredible. Yeah, especially at 6'3", Jet. I mean, we remember when we'd watch Rondo have like a triple-double or get 8 rebounds, and you'd say, wow, imagine a guy 6'1" getting 8 rebounds. Russell Westbrook's 6'3". I've seen him next to Steph Curry, who we think of as, an average-sized man and kind of small for the NBA. They're the same height. Westbrook's 6'3". Again, I think he can make a case he's the best athlete in the sport, certainly the best athlete to ever play the point guard position. Yeah, you could definitely make that case. Jason Kidd was a really good rebounder.
Yeah, Jason Kidd's the only other guy I could think of that is that level of rebounder.
Yeah, and Kidd was thicker. Jason Kidd was like a linebacker out there, and he played great defense.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, look, I don't care what era you're playing in. When you're averaging 11 rebounds a game, that blows me away. And a lot of that is just pure effort.
Right, because these aren't simple triple doubles that he's putting up. He's putting up massive triple doubles. He's averaging over 20 points, and he's making sure there's no doubt. He's averaging this year 11 rebounds, 11 assists, and 22 points a game. So it's not like
That's
he's just
incredible.
squeaking by. I mean, those are huge numbers. And he's had games. I was looking at his game log, Sap, this year. He's had games with 20 rebounds, 20 assists. I mean, just his numbers are incredible. I mean, you could stack his numbers up against anybody if you're just looking pure numbers. Absolutely.
His numbers are. He's never become a really good outside shooter. He's
crappy at it. He sucks at it.
31% 3-point shooter in the game is geared towards 3-point shooting. Chris Paul's a more accomplished shooter. To me, it's like Chris Paul is incredibly efficient. Like there's no wasted motion there. With Westbrook, it's like exhausting. I think that Chris Paul is a jazz singer, a jazz musician, whereas Russell Westbrook is a rapper, right? He's hard, he's in your face, he's energetic. It's actually, exhausting sometimes to watch him play. Chris Paul, it's a symphony. So it depends on what type of music you like better. You obviously like rap more than I do, and maybe I like jazz more than you do.
Here's the last argument I'm going to make, for Russell Westbrook, and maybe it's an argument for Chris Paul as well. If I look at those two guys, I think Russell Westbrook, put him on a team with no talent, no other good players, basically put him on the Celtics with the Celtics bench. So he's playing with a bunch of bums. I think he elevates that team to getting close to or in the playoffs. No other talent. He's the guy. He's the only guy. I think he can really elevate that team. I don't think Chris Paul would do as well in that situation. But if you put one of those two guys with a co-star, a Bradley Beal, a James Harden, a Devin Booker, I think that's where Chris Paul excels more. So it's sort of like a pick your poison sort of thing. The situation that Russell Westbrook is probably best in is when he is the only guy, and that's how he can elevate the team the most, is when everything is on him. Chris Paul, I don't think could take a team with a bunch of bumps. He'd make them better, but I don't think he can raise, because he can't score as much as Russell Westbrook. He can't do those amount of things. So, but if you put Chris Paul with another all-star caliber player, he can get more out of them than Russell Westbrook can, and can elevate the team further.
Yeah, look what he's done in Phoenix this year. They're in contention for the best record in basketball. Devin Booker's outstanding as an all-star. DeAndre Ayton's a really good player. Monty Williams is one of my favorite coaches in the league, and Chris Paul's elevated them to the point where they are battling Utah for the best record in all of basketball. And, he's been that addition this year that has led to that. I think he's a great leader. And I think you're so right, Jet. In the past, I think he turned off some of his teammates, maybe at times being condescending, not being tolerant of mere mortals. And now I think he's more accepting of younger players, and maybe he's mellowed with age. they're both fascinating to watch. That's what makes the NBA so great, Jet. And I'm not here to do a public service announcement for the NBA, but players come in all shapes and sizes. It's like that in the NFL with quarterbacks. You like Patrick Mahomes, you like Aaron Rodgers, you can like Tom Brady. They're all completely different. Same thing in the NBA. I mean, we got two all-time greats playing the same position. They just happen to play it completely differently, and they're both great to watch. I just prefer Chris Paul. And like you, Jet, a couple of years ago, I was not a huge fan of his. He really grew on me in Oklahoma City because they looked like they were tanking last year, and he got them to the 5 seed, and they got to a game 7 against Houston when Houston had more talent. And I was like, this guy has really elevated the Oklahoma City Thunder. They moved on from him. Can you picture if the Celtics somehow were able to have gotten Chris Paul last offseason, how different the Celtics season may have been?
Yeah, they should have made a bigger push to do it, honestly. They should.
And I know the salary's exorbitant, but you know what? Are you in business or you're not? I mean, that's a guy you go get.
Yeah, maybe they did. Maybe that was, we knew that they were trying to move Kemba Walker, the damaged goods of Kemba Walker, and maybe that was something they were dangling, and it wasn't at all interesting to the Thunder, who didn't want to take on yet another terrible contract. So, I think it would be. I think the Celtics would be competing for a championship this year if it was a net Kemba Walker for Chris Paul swap. I think they'd be competing for a championship, and Brad Stevens and Danny Ainge's job would be in much better shape than they are.
He'd be the leader that Mike Gorman was talking about, the guy that would make everybody accountable. Just think how much easier it would be for Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown knowing they don't have to worry about leadership, that Chris Paul takes care of that as a great point guard. I could see Chris Paul and Marcus Smart maybe, busting heads together at some point, but I think in the end there'd be a pretty good defensive backcourt. That's for sure.
Missed opportunity, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I remember
because he could have been had.
He could have been had. I thought Milwaukee should have went after him. I thought he would have been perfect with Giannis. I mean, there were so many teams. I was literally, pooping my pants that the Clippers were going to go and try to get him, but I don't know if he could have gone back there, although Doc Rivers was no longer coaching there. Just picture Chris Paul with Kawhi and Paul George. Put Chris Paul in almost any situation. They're a title contender. That's the ultimate compliment to give a player who doesn't really put up great numbers anymore. Like I said, he's going to finish top 7, top 8 MVP voting, averaging 16 points and 8 assists a game. Still plays elite defense. That's pretty impressive for a guy who's closing in on 35, 36 years old. He's not young, but I think he'll play for many years because he doesn't rely solely on athleticism. I don't know how much longer Westbrook can play because he is ultimately an athlete out there that just overwhelms people.
And yet he's still averaging a triple-double, so it doesn't look like he's just slowing down.
I admire him. Again, he's not my favorite player. He's too out of control for me. But man, if you're paying $100 for a ticket, that guy's showing up and he's playing. He's going to bust his ass.
I do also think this: if a team say it didn't work in Phoenix and the team was playing poorly, or in Oklahoma City, I think that Russell Westbrook can live with that and still be happy putting up his numbers. I think if Chris Paul's on a team that's playing poorly, I think it would just be a disaster. He would become a massive problem. I don't think he can rein it in if that happens.
No, he's a perfectionist. He's the smartest guy on the court. I know we like to, or at least I like to compare Aaron Rodgers to Kevin Durant for being somewhat thin-skinned, but then having just like this otherworldly talent. I see a little bit of Aaron Rodgers and Chris Paul as well. I think Rodgers is better now than he was 3 or 4 years ago in terms of dealing with teammates. When you're that good and that smart and you are so self-assured, sometimes you come across as being condescending, and that doesn't always work. And I think as both of those athletes have gotten older, they've kind of learned, okay, I've got an incredible IQ, whether it be on the basketball court or on the football field. Not everybody's the same. I've got to try to, bring them along. I always equate it to this. I don't even drive a car, but this is my reference. If you're out there driving and there's a lot of bad drivers out there, you kind of have to learn how to deal with them because they're not going to be able to deal with you when you're an elite driver. So again, I think those athletes have had to learn to, rein it in a little bit and work with these players. But both fantastic players to watch and both first ballot Hall of Famers as we talk about Chris Paul and Russell Westbrook.
Yeah, I am an elite driver, Sap, just so you know. So anytime
you are, I've driven with you
very
many
elite.
Times. Very, very good. Very elite, yeah.
Yeah. So like you'll take Paul.
Driver.
You'll take Paul. I'll take Westbrook. We'll both be happy at the end of the day. And so, two great players, and one team is more in the mix than the other. But before it's over, maybe Russell Westbrook will have the Wizards in a play-in game. And honestly, considering the West, they might both lose in the first round. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the West is deep. You could see Phoenix playing Dallas. I mean, Dallas could beat Phoenix.
Sure.
They
could.
Best of 7 series. That would not be a shock. And if Phoenix ever drops to 3, I would think the Lakers would beat them in a series. The West is just that much deeper. So, yeah, as great a regular season as Phoenix has had, it's kind of set up that they're not going to get to the finals. And again, I put out on Twitter a couple of days ago, was Chris Paul the greatest player in NBA history never to make it to the NBA finals? And I think you can make that case. Go down the list of the all-time greats. They've all won championships or at least gotten to the finals. I mean, Barkley got there once. Karl Malone got there twice. Westbrook, Harden both went, albeit as babies with OKC. I think you make a case that Chris Paul is the greatest player to never play in the NBA finals. And I don't think he's going to make it this year.
Yeah, and I'm sure that infuriates him to no end.
It does, but you know what? Ken Griffey Jr., one of the greatest players of all time, never played in a World Series.
Yeah, baseball's different. In basketball. We've talked about this,
Yeah, baseball, you don't hold it against the player. In basketball, you do. But, I mean, how many times did Chris Paul have the best team? And when we look back to the Clippers team, you had Blake Griffin, a flawed player, right?
I think he got overrated. Yeah, I agree.
Absolutely overrated. He was winning dunk contests. He was exciting to watch. And DeAndre Jordan was a good rim protector, rebounder. Great.
So maybe their ceiling wasn't getting the finals, but they still disappointed in the playoffs. They would exit earlier than they should have.
Yeah, they did. And look, OKC was disappointing with Westbrook and Durant. They went to 1 finals in 8 years with those 2 guys and James Harden for a while. So, again, winning's not that easy. That's why, when people love to knock LeBron James, the man has 4 titles and has been to 10 finals. That's pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, whatever.
All right, keep yawning.
Yeah. Well, you know what, Sap? That's going to do it. I'm tired now. That's going to do it for the Pick and Roll.
Well, you
NBA
came
podcast.
out like a bat out of hell at the beginning of it. You sounded like you were on,
did I?
Adrenaline or something.
You were. That's why I'm so tired now.
You're like Russell Westbrook. See, here's the difference. You're just like Russell Westbrook. You're like all this energy and, bat out of hell. You're manic. I'm like Chris Paul. I got a little gut, or in my case, a big gut. And I'm just out here, picking my spots.
Sure. Yeah. I have an MVP award. You have nothing.
That's true. But I've got great commercials.
Yeah. Westbrook has great clothing, though.
Oh, man. He's a sharp-looking guy. He really is.
Go.
He's the Cam Newton. He's the Cam Newton of basketball.
Yeah, I would not be surprised if they're friends. They have a similar style.
Yep.
So this has been the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, with Chris Paul and Russell Westbrook, presented by Full Press Coverage. Check out fullpresscoverage.com. Do it. They have great podcasts. This one's there. They have great articles. Some are by John Sapichetti, most inspired by me. Yes. And make sure you find our podcast wherever podcasts are found. Make sure you check out our YouTube, youtube.com/JetStryer. Check out our Twitters at JohnSap25, JOHNSAP25, at JetStryer, JETSTRIAR. We will always tweet out links to the show, both the YouTube and the audio version. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We'll be back Friday with a new pod. Until then, see you, everybody.